we should all be able to at least agree that someone in a mental health crisis should not be able to buy an assault weapon.
Welcome back to Parallel Justice, the podcast that dives into the crimes and cases that have dominated the national headlines through exclusive interviews with the very attorneys who fought the cases. Some of the discussion you hear today may be controversial. However, we know that silence, especially on tough issues, only enables and encourages wrongdoers. It's our goal to bring these issues to light so that we may have meaningful discourse around them. The views expressed in this podcast are those of our guests, who are experts in these areas. Their opinions are invaluable, however, they do not necessarily reflect the views of the National Center for Victims of Crime. The topics we discuss may be disturbing, and they are intended for adult audiences only. Some of these topics may also be triggering, and we encourage you to practice good self-care and seek support. I'm Renee Williams, Executive Director of the National Center for Victims of Crime, and your guide through this conversation. Now, let's start the show. Welcome back to another episode of Parallel Justice. I'm your host, Renee Williams, and joining me today are two attorneys who many of you will have heard of, and they are currently working on some of the most cutting-edge litigation in this country. And they're here today to tell me about how the work that they're doing right now is going to have sweeping impacts and make us all safer. We've got Tony Romanucci and Tad Thomas joining us. And before I get too deep into these cases, I just want to give them a chance to introduce themselves. So starting with Tad, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Tad Thomas with Thomas Law Offices. My firm's in 5 states, but home is Louisville, Kentucky.
All right. And Tony?
Well, thank you, and I love being on with my friend Tad, a fellow T, as we like to call each other. My name is Tony Romanucci, and my firm, Romanucci and Blandon, is based in only one state, and that's Illinois, and we're from Chicago, but we practice nationally.
Okay, so you're both here to talk about your efforts in mass violence litigation, and I've got to be honest, it's completely baffling to me that this has become an area of law that we're almost beginning to recognize as a specialty. I think 10 years ago, we all would have been appalled if we knew we were going to be having this conversation today. But you've actually worked several of these cases, and you're both currently working on 2 of the more recent mass shootings. Although I have to say, again, these were within the last 2 years, and we just saw another one. For reference, it is June 17th, and we are seeing a case come out of Michigan at a splash pad where there was a mass shooting. So even though I say recent, these now seem like they're distant memory, but they are the Old National Bank shooting in Louisville and the Highland Park 4th of July parade. And these are 2 very different cases that are being fought on state laws, based on state laws. And so they're very different based on the 2 states where they took place. And that type of overlapping and the layers of legality make things incredibly complex. So we're going to take this slow, especially keeping in mind that a lot of our listeners are not attorneys. And I want to just explain the facts of each case first before we really start to dig into some of these broader questions. So Tad, you're working with Tony on that Old National Bank case. And before we get started in any of this, I just want to ask, can you talk about some of the victims first? We always tend to get knee deep in who the shooter was, and we forget the victims. So can you give us some light on who they were and the type of people they were?
Louisville is a big, small town. And when that shooting happened, it was like everybody in the city knew someone who was there that day, either a victim or someone who was in the building or, on the street there. The victims were pretty wide ranging. It was, I represent the estate of a father of 2, had a very young family. They just, this is their second Father's Day without a father sitting at the table. I represent the estate of another gentleman who was killed that was in his 60s. He was a senior vice president at the bank. And then, Tony and I represent several that were injured as well, including one of whom is a friend of mine that lives down the street from me in my neighborhood. And so, another father with 2 college-age kids. The victims were wide ranging. Most of the victims were in early morning meeting immediately prior to the bank open in a conference room when the shooter came in, a novice shooter who had never shot, as far as we can tell, a weapon, much less an AR-15, which he purchased the week before the shooting.
And I think that's an incredibly important point that we're going to definitely start to dig into, especially as we walk through the legal theories. But can you give us a breakdown of what happened that day?
Sure. It was a Monday morning. It was April 10th of 2023. The shooter had been off work. The shooter actually had a history of mental illness going back for about a year. The week prior, he was suffering an acute mental breakdown. His parents, who by all accounts, even though he was older, he was in his 20s, parents were still very involved in his life. He did not live at home. They had no idea he had a weapon. But he called his mom and said he was having a mental breakdown. His mom got on the phone, got him an appointment with a counselor and a psychiatrist that week, and then thought that he was improving. The following week, Monday morning, immediately prior to the bank opening up, he walks in with an AR-15 that he had purchased the week before from River City Firearms here in Louisville. Walked up to one of the individuals and said, "Hey, it's time to go," and let her run. And then the conference room was glass and just proceeded to, unload the weapon through the glass in the conference room. And that's where most of the victims were. And then proceeded down the hall and shooting another couple. And as some of the employees escaped out the door, and he proceeded to follow them. But about that time is when law enforcement responded to the scene. Who they engaged the shooter. He started just firing randomly out the door and out the windows, and until he was taken out by law enforcement.
Now, if you do any research into this case, he left quite a manifesto.
Sure. He left a letter for the people that found it after, essentially saying that it was way too easy to buy an AR-15, to buy a weapon of mass destruction. And he wanted to show how easy it was, and hoped that this shooting, as you said, perversely, hoped that this shooting would in some way help limit firearm sales in the future. He was obviously a sick individual. And the one thing you talk about how common these have gotten, and it's amazing to me to this day, we can argue, firearms restrictions, many of us in Kentucky are pro Second Amendment, but we all have to figure that someone who is in a mental health crisis should not be able to walk into a firearms store, be upsold, essentially going in looking for a handgun, decided to buy an AR-15, and turn around and use that against friends and coworkers. We should all be able to at least agree that someone in a mental health crisis should not be able to buy an assault weapon.
Interestingly, in his manifesto, he wrote about how absurdly easy it was for him to get that gun. And so do you want to talk about how he obtained the gun and what happened at River City and what you both know?
So he went into River City Firearms, and what we've later come to know is that River City Firearms is ranked by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms as one of the gun shops whose weapons are frequently used in gun crimes. So this particular firearm shop has a tendency to sell firearms to people that shouldn't have them. We have a security video from the firearm shop, and we found an eyewitness who was there when the purchase occurred. The eyewitness is the widow of a retired police officer who was there to buy a gun. She saw this purchase going down and told her husband when they got out to the car, there's something wrong with that boy. They made eye contact. He had all of the signs of someone who should not be buying a weapon. She told him we need to stop it. We got to do something. And unfortunately, the retired police officer said, "Hey, you got to have probable cause. We don't have any probable cause. There's nothing we can do." The following Monday, when the shooting happened, she had this, feeling in the pit of her stomach that it was the person she saw. And sure enough, that's who it was. And being a small town like Louisville is, we were able to locate her, and she told us about watching this purchase go down. He was uncomfortable. He was nervous. He was not engaging with the seller. He was not engaging with the people around. He had no idea how to set the weapon up. They had to put the sight on for him. They had to put the grip on for him. He clearly had no idea what he was doing. And they upsold him some accessory parts, including 3 30-round magazines, high-capacity magazines, the day of the shooting.
The shooter is obviously dead. Were any criminal charges filed? How difficult are criminal charges, even if it's criminal negligence, in a case like this against the gun store?
So no criminal cases were filed against the gun store. And certainly that's arguable as to whether or not there should have been. But obviously that's a big point, a big basis for the lawsuit that Tony and I have filed here against River City Firearms and the accessory manufacturers.
And they haven't been shut down despite the multiple times. Do they have a licensing requirement?
So not only have they not been shut down, the day of the press conference when we filed the lawsuits, they advertised a sale of AR-15s so that they could capitalize on the extra business and the extra attention.
As attorneys, how much did your stomach sink when you saw them doing that?
It was pretty infuriating.
Yeah. So, Tony, Highland Park's a very different case in this. It was out in the open. It's a fairly affluent community. But like Tad, I want to talk about the victims that you're representing before we get into the ugly bits. Who were they, and how are they as people?
Renee, I thought about, who are our victims? And, if the listeners just close their eyes for a second, and if they pictured themselves at any parade that they've been to or seen a parade on TV, they would know, even though they weren't in Highland Park, because the parade was attended by children waving flags, their parents pushing strollers. There were grandparents. There was anyone and everyone that you could imagine was at the parade because it was the 4th of July. It was a celebration. We were just coming out of pandemic. Gatherings were just becoming routine. So it was pretty crowded that day. And this was in downtown Highland Park. And as you said, it is, somewhat of an affluent community, but also very genuine. Very tight-knit community, and just like in the sense that Louisville is a large, small community, Highland Park is even smaller, and it was impossible for anybody who lived in Highland Park not to know anybody who was shot or killed in Highland Park. When you think of the number of people who were shot, over 50 were shot, 7 were killed. It was a carnage. It really was an absolute massacre because there was one similarity between, this shooting and Mandalay Bay, although they were 2 very different shooting under 2 very different theories. The shooter here in Highland Park also had an advantage of height. He climbed a building, not a very tall building, but tall enough where he had a height advantage and was able to look down on the parade goers, and he started spraying, click after click. And that's one of the problems that we have with these AR-15s, these military-style weapons, is that, first of all, there's the issue of magazine capacity, which in this particular case, it was a 30 mag capacity. And you can pull off a shot as quick as you can pull your trigger finger, and it's pretty quick. And so he was able to get off 80 shots in less than 90 seconds. And that's with changing. I mean, he had to change 2 clips. He finished one, exchanged another, finished another, and then put in another clip. The M&P, which was the originator of the assault rifle, it was a military weapon. It was something that the military needed to have, something that was lighter and that was easier to fire. The only difference is that this one's not automatic. The AR-15s that are sold to consumers are semi-automatic, which means you need one trigger pull for each shot. But the shooter in this case, Robert Cremo Jr., 18 years old, he was almost the prototypical profile of someone that we've seen across the country take on these mass shootings. The difference was that he fell in love with these guns when he was not an adult. Mm-hmm. And he was surfing and reading magazines and watching all this great marketing on how wonderful these guns are, how you can be more of a man if you own these guns. And when you're speaking to youths who are considered the outsiders in their class, who aren't part of the cliques where you're cool, if you're speaking that language to somebody, it's very attractive. And so it's basically a grooming. And that's what happened. And he got his father to sign for the weapons for him, because Robert Cremo Jr. did have mental health history. They did have calls to his home, prior to Highland Park. So his father vouched on his FOID application that he was mentally fit, to own and possess these types of weapons. So right after his 18th birthday, he was able to get a hold of an AR-15 with the help of his father. And, within a short time, he created history in Highland Park.
And his father is being held criminally liable, or has been held.
Well, I was going to say, almost say, Renee, that is not correct, because he has been criminally liable. They went Lake County State's attorney, Eric Reinhardt, who has taken a very aggressive position in this case, prosecuted the father for signing for the FOID application, and he was found guilty. So the father was held criminally liable, and now Junior is, I believe, his trial date is set for February of 2025.
What are the current charges against him?
Well, he is facing, he killed 7 people, but I know that he's facing 21 counts of different types of murder, felony murder, first-degree murder, and I don't know the other ones. And then 117 other charges, from aggravated battery to assault, you name it, attempt murder for everybody. So, I mean, he has literally, his charges are in the hundreds.
So there were warning signs with him. He obviously did not have any mental health interventions. I saw some references to maybe where the Highland Park police fell down a little bit. They did an outstanding job in responding to the shooting, but there might have been some signs that they missed.
Yeah.
Are you all considering any of that?
The danger we all face in these cases, and, I'm not offering an opinion of right or wrong, but even when you look at the Uvalde case, and I'll circle it back to this, Renee. When you look at Uvalde right now, and we do have several clients in that litigation, some law firms have filed cases against UPS and FedEx, just as recently as last week or the week before, for transporting, the firearm to the shooter in that case. And it's tempting to say, "Oh, that's great. We should amend our complaint and name them too." But sometimes there's a limit as to who you can sue, in my opinion, based upon where the focus should be. We're trying to limit these gun manufacturers from either selling these guns at all, or if they have to be sold They can only be sold to anyone with a hunter's license who can demonstrate that they will only use these to hunt. And Tad, you're more from hunter's country than I am. How many people have you met that actually hunt with AR-15s?
Not one. There's purely a sporting device.
Exactly. And that's the point. That is the point. You look at this social media targeted advertising, and it's all about hunting. And it makes sense. I mean, it's a long gun. Rifles are long guns, shotguns are long guns, and AR-15 is a long gun. All right, we'll use them all for hunting. And I go around and I ask that question routinely. Who do you know that hunts with an AR-15?
Because what hunter do you know needs to get off 80 rounds in 90 seconds?
No,
Right.
a real hunter wants one shot.
Mm-hmm.
They want a one-shot kill.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they do is they harvest the entire animal for their personal consumption. It's something that a real hunter gives a blessing to that animal. It's just mysterious.
Technical, but this is my country coming out. This is the Ohio girl coming out in me. You hear a lot about buckshot. You don't want buckshot in the animal, so it's one shot and you want it done.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I want to talk about the legalities of these cases because there's a lot and it gets super complicated. And I think, Tony, an important thing you said was there are attorneys out there who are suing the UPS and FedEx for transporting, but that helps the victims, that gets them some money in a very needed time, but that doesn't actually stem the problem that we're trying to address. You all are taking on a really cutting edge area of the law, and it's scattered state by state, and you're pumping tons of money into these cases because litigation's expensive. Why are you doing that?
And the first true case that I ever got involved in where I understood the absolute horrific carnage that these guns cause was in the Pulse case, which was, in 2016 in Orlando, Florida. And from there, we wound up in the Mandalay Bay, and then after that, it just kept evolving. And at a certain point, we realized that there were so many hundreds of mass shootings that were happening each year that if somebody didn't do something, and what I'm saying the someone is our representatives in Washington, D.C., right? They will never get over themselves in overturning or amending, the Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act, which I think is an offensive name as it is, right? They want to protect the arms people. They don't want to protect victims. They want to protect the actual manufacturers of the guns. And so, we actually made a firm decision. We made a law firm decision that we will begin prosecuting gun manufacturers when there is the appropriate set of facts and circumstances that make it viable, where we see a path to recovery, meaning that we're going to make this unsustainable for the gun manufacturers. That's our goal, is for their manufacturing of guns, of these types of weapons, to be unsustainable.
Dad?
This is the Old National case is my first, foray into this type of litigation. And I was privileged enough to have a friend like Tony who's been doing this all over the country for years. For me, when you say, why do you take on a case like this? It's because something has to be done. Somebody's got to do something. And, if we have the wherewithal to be able to do it, even if it's just chipping around at the edges, if we can find some crack that gives us an avenue that protects somebody somewhere along the line, it's worth doing, And so, is it, uphill litigation in a lot of respects? Absolutely. But it's the right thing to do. A friend of both Tony's and mine's a lawyer down in New Orleans, Vince Glorioso. And, Vince talked about a case that he had, and he's, some cases you take just because they need to be taken. This is a case that just needs to be taken.
So in addition to the gun manufacturers, there are a couple of other folks that you all have chosen to hold accountable here. So let's talk about those. We've got Radical Firearms and the actual gun stores. How is liability established against them? Give us a walkthrough of the facts of how you got to them.
So Radical in the Old National case is the manufacturer, and they actually are not currently a defendant. We did a data download on the shooter's devices, and we were not satisfied that we could put together direct connection with the manufacturer. So we chose not to sue them in this case. River City, like I was saying earlier, we have very, very good evidence of what we call a negligent entrustment claim under Kentucky law. And that, they should not have sold a weapon to this shooter. The ATF talks about how, these gun shops are the first line of defense, whether it's against terrorism, gun running, use in other types of crimes. There are things that the sales team at the store needs to be on the lookout for to identify potential shooters, even if it's someone who looks like they may commit suicide. They're supposed to be trained to look out for that. And so we've pursued River City on a negligent entrustment claim, among other types of claims, that, they should have never let this guy walk out with any kind of firearm, much less an AR-15. And then we've also pursued the manufacturer of the different accessories, including the high-capacity magazines, the pistol grip, and the sight that made this weapon even more deadly.
Tony, who are you pursuing in the Highland Park case?
So our case is a little bit tighter right now. That doesn't mean that it won't expand. But right now our defendants, are the shooter and his father, and then Smith and Wesson, which is the weapons manufacturer in this particular case. And then we also have the gun shop, which is Bud's Gun Shop, and then the distributor, which I believe is Red Dot. And what's interesting about our case, and I don't even know if you knew this, Tad, is that Highland Park instituted an assault weapons ban years ago. So in Highland Park, you are not allowed to own an assault weapon. And Robert Cremo Jr. had a Highland Park address with a Highland Park zip code. So he never should have been sold a weapon. He should have been, I'm not sure what the right technology term is, but there should have been a wall built around him. There should have been some warning going up saying, hey, you cannot buy this gun online. As soon as you put in your address to where it was going to be delivered to, you can't sell it. And so they sold it. So, we feel pretty confident about, our case against those two. And then, with regard to Smith and Wesson, as Tad said, we have not sued Radical Firearms yet, but in the hypothetical, anywhere right now where a gun manufacturer gets sued, you can't sue them for a defective product or for failure to warn or for, whatever theory that you could think of, anything bad about the gun itself. You have to find an exception to PLCA. And one of the exceptions is if they violated any state law. And so in Illinois, we've said here that they violated our Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Practices Act by selling these weapons for what we've been talking about, hunting, when they're really weapons of mass destruction, because that's what's being used. And so we have taken that lift on, knowing that we have a very high hill to climb, pushing that proverbial rock up the hill.
So we're seeing a massive failure at the point of sale in both of these cases. And ATF has all of these regulations that are supposed to limit this. Does ATF do any checks? Are they responsible to do any checks? They come in and do the investigation after a tragedy has happened, but what are they doing proactively?
Well, I can't remember the date when when Congress actually did and President signed new legislation on background checks. I don't remember the date, but I don't know that we have enough data yet to determine whether or not these new background checks, especially on people who have mental illness, have worked. If you listen to one of the senators that I heard speak last week, I won't mention his name. He's saying, and he was one of the sponsors. So keep looking. He says that it's been very effective, and that mass shootings are down this year, which is true.
We're talking about legislation that's coming out, but one thing we never thought would have a huge impact on these types of cases is the Supreme Court, and specifically the Supreme Court striking down legislation that's meant to protect us. Do you all want to talk about the case that just came out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest message that the court sent is this is something that Congress has to deal with. And we can argue about, whether or not it was the right ruling on bump stocks, but I think we can all agree that, Congress does have a purview in this area, and they're absolutely, they've done nothing. They've done nothing on these issues. That really makes much of a difference in my mind. And, bump stocks is one, how they can't, how Congress can't get together and say that this is essentially turning a semi-automatic into a fully automatic and it needs to be illegal. There's no hunting purpose for a bump stock. I mean, it makes zero sense that Congress can't do something about it.
Yeah. I mean, I take this one a little bit more personally too, because this is the executive order that Donald Trump signed after Mandalay Bay. We represented over 70 people in that case, and to hear that, and that was, and that shooter in that case used a bump stock. That's why that he got off 1,000 rounds. Don't forget, he shot 1,000 rounds from Mandalay Bay down into the Route 91 festival. So, for us to see that executive order being overturned certainly was a stinger. Our clients are, now feeling like, whoa, now somebody can add on a bump stock and go, because they were banned. There's been a 5-year, 6-year ban in place, de facto. And now all of a sudden, somebody can go buy a bump stock again and have that mechanism work to pull the trigger on the gun even faster than less than 1 per second.
I want to close kind of where we started, just talking about victims and those left behind in these tragedies. As you all are working with communities and trying to help your clients heal, what are some of the greatest needs that you see that they have after one of these cases, and how can we help?
The litigation process is hard enough on top of the trauma that they've suffered. But, I'd like to see more attorneys trained in working with the trauma that our clients have suffered.
I 100% agree with Tad. I mean, I don't think there's anything better than we could do to help our own clients is by being the best informed so that we can give them the best advice. But the needs that I see that our clients have, I don't know that they'll ever stop. I mean, they are so scarred, obviously physically by what happened, but the mental part of it, how it's disrupted, entire communities and families. For example, one of our victims in Highland Park was a 9 or 10-year-old boy who now is paralyzed for life, and how this family now of 8, because there were 5 other siblings, and one of them is a twin, by the way, of this boy who was shot, how their whole life is just upended. It's just changed completely. Their home life has changed. Their actual home has to change. Cars have to change. Everything now revolves, nearly everything revolves around, the injured child, as opposed to being about the whole family. And then, the ones, who have had people killed, who have voids in their life. You can never bring that back. You can only try. And so Renee, I don't know that things will ever be fixed, but I do know that, with the National Crime Victims Association, because you are one of the few organizations that can help victims, that you're doing everything that you can. And the more people that we can get involved, I think the more people we can help.
We're absolutely trying. And even for those not directly impacted, these communities really feel this, and this has far-reaching impact in the communities. And Highland Park has 2 years coming up. How are they processing this? And I understand they are going to have a parade this year for the first time.
Yes, yes. So last year there was no parade. So 1 year post, they decided not to have a parade, but this year there will be a parade. I can only imagine the type of preparation that they will have for this parade and the trepidation of people going to this parade. Just how can you not, in the back of your mind, think copycat? Just think that. I mean, we know that Cremo's in jail, right? We know that he's being held right now, and okay, he's not a danger or a threat on July 4th, 2024. But my goodness, what about someone who wants to create that same type of that's how do you prevent soft targets from becoming targets at all?
And is there just not room for us to have anything in our society anymore? I took a train to New York yesterday and I went to see a show on Broadway, and every part of my brain was still thinking these days, what would I do? Where do I go? What's the
Yeah,
security like?
yeah. Well, I was at last week. I attended. It's very coincidental that it's there, but it's called Ravinia Festival here, and it's located in Highland Park. And it's this beautiful outdoor venue where you can hear music. And we went to go see Robert Plant last week. And you sit on the lawn and you listen, from the pavilion, the music, and they have TV screens and these, loudspeakers set up through the lawn, and it's picnic, and it's just fun in the sun and fun at night. And there are police swarming everywhere. And when you look around, I did the same thing, Renee. I said, can I scale? How fast can we scale this fence to get out? Because there are just thousands of people that are carpeting this lawn, right? And you're a sitting target. By the time you hear it, it's too late if somebody's pointing in your direction.
And as long as we can fight the fight, we have to keep doing it because there has to be change. It makes no sense that if Congress is going to abdicate their responsibilities, somebody has to make changes. And if there's some small part we can play in that, then that's what we're going to do.
Tony?
Well, Renee, I mean, Tad said it, so well. Let me tell you, there are only a couple of handfuls of law firms in this country that are consistently active in this litigation. And, to have Tad, jump in and his firm with all of his contacts and his knowledge and being past president of AAJ and his contacts in Washington, D.C., it's a big win for GPV. It really is, because these are the type of firms that we need to do this. Because don't forget, we said earlier that this is very, a tough road litigation, and it is. We don't know that we're going to succeed. We think we can, and we want to, and we're confident we can, but we don't know. So we're taking a risk that we will not win, and that's okay with us. We know that. That's what's so great about what we're doing, is we know how difficult this is, and we're willing to take that risk for the sake of our clients. But on the other hand, it's also great to live in a state like Illinois, where our governor recognizes how dangerous assault weapons are, and Illinois is one of the few states that has an assault weapons ban in place now, and that includes high capacity magazines and sight targets and anything that could make these guns killing machines as opposed to hunting rifles. So I'm very, very proud to see that what we're doing is having an effect. We just need to get Washington on board.
I want to thank you both for joining me today and for the absolutely incredible work you're doing to make us all safer. And thank everybody for listening to another episode of Parallel Justice. As promised, we will put links to both Tad and Tony's law firms and their contact information in the show notes. But if you are a victim of mass violence and you need help, help is available for you if you go to victimconnect.org. Thank you again for joining us, and please join us again next week for another episode of Parallel Justice. Thank you for joining us for this conversation. If you have any questions about your rights after listening to the show, please visit us at victimsofcrime.org. Our guest's information is also always available in the show notes. This podcast was created by the National Center for Victims of Crime in partnership with our center and affiliate, the National Crime Victim Bar Association. More information about both organizations is available at victimsofcrime.org and victimbar.org. Thank you, and please join us again next week.